Hi class, today we're going to be talking about behavioral disorders in childhood. Specifically, we're going to talk about these two disorders, oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. ODD and CD actually have a lot in common with each other, which is why I have this little Venn diagram of kind of overlapping circles. And that's because they're sometimes seen as kind of that there can be a lot of overlappingness, right? If you think about what is being oppositional, right, is talking back, for example, it's not following directions. And then when we have something like conduct disorder, where we're talking about a little bit more, aggression and potentially violence and kind of a higher level. So sometimes we might think about them as kind of being similar in nature, although they are distinct disorders. So what I want to get into is what is ODD. So here are the symptoms: having an angry or irritable mood. Again, this is not just, hey, I'm mad today. All of us get mad, but instead it is our larger systematic difficulties really regulating emotions. And this is irritability. Even like small things might make somebody very, very irritable. We also see this argumentative or defiant behavior. So talking back to adults, defying what they said. Oh, go clean your room, and I'm not going to do that, right? So arguing about little things. And vindictiveness towards others. So if you do something to me, I'm going to do it back to you. You trip me in line, and so now I'm going to push you down and, the next time I see you. And what we see is that this should be a pattern of behavior. I'm pretty sure it's a 6-month that's been going on for a while. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about ODD is that it can be diagnosed even if you only have one adult that you're oppositional towards. So, potentially you're oppositional towards dad, but not towards mom. Or maybe a teacher instead of your parents. And it can be diagnosed if you just have it with one person. One of the questions I always have is like, what's that dividing line between the normal and the abnormal behavior, right? There's a lot of, kids at times can be angry and irritable. They could be argumentative or potentially vindictive, and at what point in time does it cross that line? So again, always think about distress and dysfunction and whether or not these symptoms really meet for that distress or dysfunction. So again, symptom number and frequency is always a huge part of this. So if you see a lot more symptoms and it is frequently occurring, it's not just a once in a blue moon, we would say that crosses that line into ODD. Also, whether or not this is developmentally unexpected. So again, does this deviate from the norm? We expect a 2-year-old to be testing some of those boundaries and saying no a lot more often, but not necessarily like a 10-year-old in a context of a class, for example. And we also want to use norm reference rating scales to really see whether or not, there really is, this kid is above and beyond what we would expect. I'm going to skip over this video for now because we're going to be watching it in class, but this is a video of showing somebody that really does seem to have a lot of symptoms of ODD. Conduct disorder, on the other hand, you have to have 3 of these symptoms, and we have a whole grouping of symptoms. So one of them is aggression to people and animals. So this might be things like robbing somebody, being violent towards somebody else. It could also be harming animals. So kind of what we think of as being very like early indicators of sociopathy and psychopathy. So if we really think about the antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, you have to have some sort of symptoms of conduct disorder prior to being diagnosed. There is also destruction of property, so things like destroying, breaking and entering, destroying different things like, arson, for example. Deceitfulness or theft, so doing things to get goods or services from another person using deceit, or theft, things like shoplifting, but also, are you mugging somebody? And other types of serious violation of rules. So when we're thinking about kids, thinking about truancy, thinking about running away from home, all of those things would be kind of lumped under that violation of rules. So here are just some of the conduct problems and how we can kind of start thinking about them. Do we think about them as being covert or overt, right? So something like defiance is an overt act. And we think about that as being very oppositional, right? It's non-destructive most of the time, but it is something that other people can see. However, substance abuse is a bit more covert. So typically we don't necessarily see somebody like, hey, I'm going to go into my high school with a handle of vodka. Instead, you might do some more covert actions. For example, I know somebody that would take in a bottle, like a soda bottle and put alcohol in it, right? That would be more covert, right? It's not explicit. We also see more destructive behaviors. And again, it can be that covert, breaking and entering is definitely destructive, but also it's probably not something that you're doing in front of everybody. And aggression, like assault or armed robbery, you are doing it in front of other people, and it is very destructive. So know this distinction between the covert and overt, and destructive and non-destructive, just as kind of an understanding of how conduct disorder can be seen. So we have these classifications of conduct disorder because we think that there's a lot of differences, about like, well, why might somebody be aggressive, for example, or, right, which is number 2, which is that reactive versus proactive aggression. So if we're reactive, it means that somebody else has done something to us and we're just reacting to it, versus proactive aggression. Oh, I need to get money, so I'm going to go steal it from this kid, right? That's proactive. And, we might see these as kind of distinct aspects of this, whether it is overt problems versus covert problems. We also know that childhood onset has a worse outcome overall, that we kind of think about it as being more long-lasting versus that adolescent onset. So some adolescents might get involved with something like, stealing and maybe substance abuse and truancy, but at the same time, they are less likely to persist in it past adolescence. And one that I think is really interesting is this capacity for prosocial emotions. We call these callous and unemotional traits. So basically, there's a subset of kids or adolescents who kind of show less, emotions towards other people, and, that having a lack of remorse or guilt over doing something, a lack of empathy towards other people, right? Like, oh, well, it's not a big deal that I stole something using a knife. That other person's emotions really don't matter to me. There's also that lack of concern about performance, so not really caring if you're failing all your classes, shallow affect, so not showing a lot of emotions, for example, and having a risk for later psychopathy, again, that is that antisocial personality disorder. And so this is just a really important distinction because we would be treating these children differently, right? If there's a lack of concern about performance, typical things that might be reinforcing, like, getting a good grade on a paper is no longer going to matter. So we might have to think about different ways of treating a child who has a limited prosocial emotions. Lying itself is not what this all is about. So you can watch this TED Talk all about, lying and how, we actually learn how to lie pretty early on. But this is going beyond just, lying about something, but it's instead, not really feeling empathy towards others. So we do know that the callous and unemotional traits are genetic. There's a strong link between this and later psychopathy. And so what we're kind of seeing is that it's not just, you have the genes for lacking, emotional traits, for example, but it's instead you also were exposed to adverse childhood experiences. So you really have to think about, maybe you were growing up in a home where you had a lot of ACEs, so things like, trauma in your childhood or abuse, for example, and that then kind of triggers these callous unemotional traits. And we do see, there are biological differences here in things like how our brain is activated. So we see less activation to other people's distress in the amygdala. Whether or not this is a cause or consequence of CU traits, we never will know because it is all correlational in nature, but we do see this as something that can be present. And I think it was really interesting to, compare this to, children who have autism who might have a harder time, understanding somebody's point of view, right? So understanding a theory of mind. Is this really distinct from that? Are kids with callous unemotional traits different than those with autism? And what we see is, yeah. And part of it is that children with autism, have a harder time with theory of mind, so they may not understand somebody else's point of view. And, a lot of children with autism are very affectionate, and they're able to empathize with another person's distress. However, with callous unemotional traits, you see that there is a recognition. Yeah, I can understand that's the other person's point of view, but I'm not responding to it emotionally. So you kind of see this kind of difference here. And so I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit more of an understanding of these CU traits. So that was the first video of the series, and you can watch the next ones. All right, bye.